Get out of first class, girl. The flight attendant's voice was a whip crack in the pressurized cabin. It was followed by the sharp, ugly sound of a slap. A collective gasp was stolen from the air, and then a profound silence fell. It was as if the very drone of the engines had ceased. Not a single person moved. Not a soul spoke. In the sudden stillness, the only motion was the trembling of hands, dozens of them, raising phones to record the aftermath. Screens glowed in the dim light, capturing the tableau. Tears streamed down some faces, unchecked. Others sat with mouths agape, minds struggling to process the raw violence they had just witnessed. In the center of the aisle stood a white flight attendant named Rebecca Mitchell. The blood had drained from her face, leaving a mask of waxy shock. Her hands shook, the tremor starting in her fingertips and running up her arms. She was frozen, her brain seemingly short-circuited by the magnitude of her own action. The polished authority she had wielded for hours had shattered, replaced by a primal terror. And in seat 12A, by the window, sat Stella Richardson. While chaos threatened to erupt around her, while passengers gasped and fumbled for their phones, Stella remained perfectly still. Her posture was poised, her breathing even, but one detail made the scene utterly horrifying. A thin, crimson line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth where her lip had split. The red was a stark, silent testament against her dark skin, proof of an assault committed at 30,000 feet. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom, tight with a tension that bordered on panic. "This is your captain speaking. We have a situation in the cabin. Everyone remain seated. Do not move. Do not leave your seats. I repeat, do not move." But it was the flight attendant who moved. With an unnerving calm that replaced her earlier shock, Rebecca Mitchell leaned down, her face close to the young girl's. Her voice was a venomous hiss, each word a nail in her own coffin. "Listen to me very carefully," she whispered. "You can move seats voluntarily, or I can have you removed from this aircraft. We can land this plane and have the police waiting. Is that what you want? To be arrested?" Stella Richardson looked up, her eyes weary but clear, and replied with devastating simplicity. "Arrested for what? I did nothing wrong." For over 2 hours, Rebecca Mitchell had targeted Stella relentlessly. She had forbidden her from drinking from her own water bottle while white passengers drank freely. She had physically blocked her from using the restroom. She had demanded she move from the seat she had paid for, citing fabricated complaints. She had grabbed her, threatened her, and through it all, Stella had remained polite, calm, and painfully aware that in Rebecca's eyes, her only crime was her existence. But Rebecca Mitchell had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea that her victim was not defenseless, that every cruel word, every discriminatory act was being documented, and she certainly had no idea what was waiting for her when the plane touched down in Los Angeles. This horrifying moment, however, was not the beginning. It was the culmination. The story had started 6 hours earlier, at JFK Airport, where an excited young girl was about to learn a brutal lesson about the world. 6 hours earlier, the terminal at JFK was a symphony of summer travel chaos. Families wrangled suitcases, business people were tethered to their laptops, and announcements echoed through the cavernous space. In the middle of it all stood Stella Richardson, practically vibrating with excitement. This was her first solo flight, a thrilling taste of independence. She was on her way to Los Angeles to spend 2 weeks with her cousin, and she could not wait. Beside her was Ms. Patricia, the nanny hired to see her safely to the gate. She had worked for Stella's family for 3 years. She was trusted, or so they thought. As they neared the gate for Flight 447 to LAX, Ms. Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor shifted. Her eyes lit up, a wide smile spreading across her face as she scanned the crowd. She saw him, her boyfriend, waving from a nearby coffee shop. What happened next set everything in motion. "Sweetie, I'll be right back," Ms. Patricia said, her smile distracted, her body already edging away. "Just stay right here, okay? Don't move." Stella nodded. "Okay, but boarding starts in 15 minutes. I know. I'll be right back," Ms. Patricia called over her shoulder, already laughing into her phone as she walked away. Stella watched her disappear into the throng, watched her embrace her boyfriend, saw them laughing together, completely lost in their own world. Then she watched them walk away, deeper into the terminal, until they were gone. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The gate agent announced boarding for first class. Stella pulled out her phone and called Ms. Patricia. It rang and rang, unanswered. She called again. Voicemail. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Boarding for the main cabin was announced. Stella's heart began to race. She searched the crowd desperately, but there was no sign of Ms. Patricia. She texted her mother, her fingers trembling. Ms. Patricia left with some guy. Should I still board? I don't want to miss my flight. Her mother's reply was a flash of digital panic. What? Stay there. I'm calling her. Don't board without an adult. But the gate agent was making the final call. Stella looked at the dwindling line, thought of her cousin waiting in Los Angeles, of the expensive ticket, of the excitement that was now souring into fear. She made a decision. She had never traveled alone, but how hard could it be? She was responsible. She could do this. Grabbing her bag, she joined the line. As she walked down the jetway, she sent one last text. I boarded. I'll be fine, Mom. It's just a few hours. I love you. She never saw her mother's frantic replies, the all-caps messages telling her to get off the plane. She was oblivious to the fact that her mother was already on the phone with the airline, her voice rising with each unanswered call to the nanny. Stella stepped onto the plane, boarding pass clutched in her hand, a mix of nerves and excitement fluttering in her stomach. This was an adventure. Near the entrance stood Rebecca Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with impeccably styled blonde hair and a smile of polished, professional enamel. She greeted the incoming passengers with a voice like warm honey. Welcome aboard! Good morning, sir. Let me help you with that. Oh, what a beautiful dress, ma'am. Welcome. But when Stella approached, something in Rebecca's expression shifted. The smile became tight, brittle. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the young black girl traveling alone. Boarding pass, she said, her tone clipped, all warmth gone. Stella handed it over with a polite smile. Rebecca examined it for far too long, her eyes flicking between the pass and Stella's face. Seat 12A. Where are your parents? I'm visiting my cousin. I have all the proper documentation to travel alone. Rebecca's eyebrows arched. Documentation? Let me see it. Stella produced the notarized letter from her mother. Rebecca plucked it from her grasp and held it up to the light, scrutinizing it like a forensic expert searching for a forgery. The line behind Stella grew longer. A man cleared his throat impatiently. Rebecca glanced up, her warm smile instantly returning for him. So sorry for the wait, sir. Just a moment. She turned back to Stella, her face a mask of cold suspicion again. How old are you? I'm old enough to travel with consent. It's in the letter. I asked how old you are. A flutter of real unease started in Stella's stomach. I'm a teenager, she said, her voice quiet. Rebecca stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment, then shoved the letter back at her. Keep your belongings under the seat in front of you. Not in the overhead bin. But I have a carry-on. Under the seat. Stella saw other passengers stowing their bags overhead without issue, but she didn't argue. Okay, thank you. She made her way to 12A, hyper-aware of Rebecca's eyes following her down the aisle. She could feel the woman's judgment like a physical weight. She slid into her window seat, trying to ignore the knot in her chest. She was just being sensitive. She stuffed her bag beneath the seat and pulled out her book, determined to salvage her trip. As the plane filled, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Rebecca kept passing her row, her gaze lingering, cold and appraising. When it was time for the safety check, Stella watched the flight attendant move through the cabin, smiling at passengers, giving their belts a cursory glance. Then, she reached row 12. She stopped in front of Stella. Without a word, she reached down and yanked on Stella's seatbelt, so hard that Stella jerked forward, the buckle digging into her lap. Is it tight enough? Stella asked, startled. Rebecca didn't answer. She yanked it again, harder, as if proving a point to an unseen audience. Then she moved on to the next row, giving the white businessman's belt barely a glance. Stella sank back into her seat, her heart pounding. The excitement she'd felt was curdling into dread. As Flight 447 climbed into the sky, Stella Richardson had no idea that her nightmare was only just beginning. The moment she settled in, she noticed the elderly white woman in 12B clutching her purse to her chest, pulling it to her far side as if to protect it. She pressed her body against the aisle, creating as much distance as the seat would allow. The message was clear. Across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive suit stared at Stella with open disgust. He leaned toward his seatmate, not bothering to lower his voice. Standards have really dropped, haven't they? Stella's cheeks burned. She kept her eyes fixed on her book, pretending she hadn't heard. 30 minutes later, her stomach growled. She reached into her bag for the granola bar she'd packed. Before she could unwrap it, Rebecca was there, looming over her. "Where did you get that food?" Her voice was sharp. "I brought it from home," Stella said, confused. "Outside food isn't allowed. Put it away." Stella glanced 2 rows up where a white man was eating a large sandwich. Rebecca had walked right past him. "But that man is eating." "Put it away." Her hands trembling, Stella put the granola bar back in her bag. The woman next to her made a sound of disgust. "Probably can't afford the airline food anyway," she stage whispered to another passenger. An hour later, Stella couldn't wait any longer. She had to use the bathroom. She made her way to the back of the plane. There was a short line of 3 people. Stella took her place at the end. Rebecca emerged from the galley, her eyes locking onto Stella like a heat-seeking missile. "What are you doing back here?" "Waiting for the bathroom." "The lavatories in the front are available." Stella glanced forward. There was a line there, too. "I'll just wait here." Rebecca stepped closer, invading her personal space. "I need you to return to your seat. Now." Just then, a white teenage girl exited the lavatory. Rebecca's entire demeanor transformed. Her face lit up with a warm, maternal smile. "Everything okay, sweetie?" The lavatory was now empty. Stella took a step toward it. Rebecca physically moved, blocking the door with her body. "I told you to return to your seat." A man in line behind Stella spoke up. "For God's sake, let the girl use the bathroom." Rebecca whirled on him. "Sir, I am handling this." The man retreated, his courage evaporating. But then a young black woman named Vanessa Cole, who had been watching from nearby, said firmly, "This is ridiculous." Rebecca ignored her completely, her eyes fixed on Stella. "Miss, if you don't return to your seat, I'll have to report you for disrupting the flight." Tears burned behind Stella's eyes, hot and humiliating. "I just need to use the bathroom, please," she whispered, hating the crack in her voice. At that moment, another flight attendant appeared, an Asian American man named James Chen. He took in the scene, Rebecca blocking the empty lavatory, Stella's distressed face, the tense onlookers. "Rebecca, what's going on?" he asked calmly. "This passenger is refusing to follow instructions," Rebecca snapped. James looked from his colleague to the young girl. He could see exactly what was happening. He gave Stella a small, reassuring look. "Go ahead and use the restroom," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "There's no issue here." Stella didn't hesitate. She darted past Rebecca and into the lavatory, locking the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she could hear the frantic rhythm in her ears. Finally alone in the cramped confines of the lavatory, she gripped the cool porcelain of the sink, her knuckles white. She stared at her own reflection, but the face looking back felt like a stranger's. Glassy eyes, brimming with tears that refused to fall, stared back. A tremor ran through her hands. This was meant to be an adventure, a joyous leap into independence on her first solo flight. Instead, it had twisted into a waking nightmare. Her fingers, clumsy and trembling, fumbled with her phone. "Mom," she typed, "something's wrong. The flight attendant keeps bothering me and won't let me do normal things. I'm scared." The reply was instantaneous, a small beacon in the suffocating darkness. Her mother must have been holding the phone, waiting. "What's the flight number? What airline? I'm handling this right now." But what could her mother do from New York? Stella was suspended 30,000 feet in the sky, a prisoner in a pressurized tube, surrounded by strangers who had already judged and condemned her for a crime she couldn't name. She splashed her face with cold water, the shock of it a welcome distraction. Deep breaths. In, out. She couldn't hide forever. She had to walk back into that lion's den. When she opened the door, Rebecca was there, a silent sentinel leaning against the bulkhead. Arms crossed, eyes like chips of ice, she made it clear. "You are being watched, monitored, judged." Stella walked the aisle in a vacuum of silence, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. The whispers, which had paused, began to coil and hiss in her wake. She slid into seat 12A and put on her headphones, desperate to disappear into the pages of her book. but the letters swam before her eyes, a meaningless blur, and the shaking in her hands would not stop. Across the aisle, the businessman abandoned all pretense of subtlety. "They really need better screening," he announced to his companion, his voice pitched to Carrie. "You never know who's on these planes anymore." Behind her, a woman whispered to her husband, but in the hyper-vigilant state of her anxiety, Stella heard every word. "I don't feel safe with her here. She seems aggressive." Aggressive? Stella had done nothing but exist. She had sat, she had read, she had tried to use the restroom. Yet somehow, in their narrative, she was the threat, the problem. A story was being woven around her, and she was powerless to cut the threads. 30 minutes of tense silence crawled by. Stella kept her head down, her music loud, trying to shrink herself into non-existence. Perhaps if she became still enough, quiet enough, they would forget her. Then Rebecca appeared again, holding a tablet like a stone commandment. Her face was a mask of grim determination. "I need you to move seats." Stella slowly removed her headphones, a wave of profound exhaustion washing over her. "Why?" "We've received complaints from other passengers about your behavior." Stella glanced around the cabin, genuinely bewildered. "What behavior? I've been reading." The elderly woman in 12B spoke up instantly as if on cue. "I complained. I don't feel comfortable sitting next to her." The businessman chimed in, his lines perfectly rehearsed. "I complained too. She's been giving everyone threatening looks, acting suspicious." "Threatening looks?" Stella's voice cracked, frayed with disbelief. "I haven't even looked at anyone. I've been reading my book." Across the aisle, a woman named Vanessa stood up, her voice a clear bell of righteous anger. "This is insane. She has been completely quiet. You people are fabricating this." A few rows back, a Hispanic man named Carlos added his support. "I've been watching this entire time. She hasn't done a single thing wrong. This is just pure racism." Audible scoffs rippled through the nearby seats. "Oh, please," a woman 2 rows up declared loudly. "Not everything is about race. Stop being so dramatic." Another passenger muttered, "Always pulling the race card." Empowered by her chorus of support, Rebecca's voice hardened, her cruelty now justified. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and move to the seat we've assigned you." Something inside Stella fractured then. The fear, the desire to be invisible, it shattered, and in its place rose a pure, clarifying anger. When she spoke, her voice was steady, fueled by the sheer injustice of it all. "I paid for this seat. I haven't violated any rules. I'm not moving." The businessman surged to his feet, his face florid with indignation. "Then remove her from the flight. We shouldn't have to deal with this." Rebecca drew her phone like a weapon. "If you refuse to comply with crew member instructions, that is a federal offense. I can have this plane diverted and have you arrested." Now Stella stood, facing the flight attendant directly. She was a shade taller than Rebecca, a fact that gave her a small, satisfying sliver of courage. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "Arrested for what? For being black on your airplane? For sitting in the seat I paid for? For using the bathroom?" The elderly woman gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "She's threatening the crew. Someone do something." "Don't you dare play that card with me," Rebecca snarled, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. "This has nothing to do with your race." "Then what does it have to do with?" Stella challenged. "Tell me one thing, one single thing, I have actually done wrong." The cabin fell quiet. Passengers twisted in their seats, the confrontation now a spectacle. And then the phones began to emerge, small black rectangles rising from purses and pockets. Some were brazen, others subtle, but the cameras were rolling. Rebecca leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper that still carried to the rows nearby. "Your attitude is the problem. You've been nothing but trouble since you stepped on this plane." "My attitude?" Stella's voice finally broke, the hurt and fear of the last 2 hours pouring out. "I've been polite to everyone. This is my first time flying alone, and you have made it a nightmare." Rebecca was breathing hard, her authority challenged by a teenager who refused to be broken. She could feel the eyes of the cabin on her, could feel control slipping through her fingers like sand. And in that moment, something inside Rebecca Mitchell snapped. Her hand moved before her mind could intervene, before the dozens of recording phones registered in her brain. Her palm connected with Stella's face with a sound that cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Sharp, violent, unmistakable. Stella's head snapped to the side. For a single frozen moment, the world stood still. The drone of the engines, the hiss of the air, everything continued, but inside the cabin, time had stopped. Passengers sat paralyzed, mouths agape, minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Slowly, Stella turned back to face Rebecca. Her hand rose to her cheek, and the cabin drew a collective, horrified breath. A thin line of crimson trickled from the corner of her mouth where her lip had split against her teeth. The blood was a stark, damning testament to the violence that had just occurred. And then, chaos erupted. Gasps and shouts tore through the silence. People scrambled to their feet. The social contract of air travel shattered into a million pieces. The phones, already out, were now held high, capturing every angle, every damning detail. But not everyone was horrified. The elderly woman in 12B began to clap, her wrinkled hands coming together in genuine, appalling appreciation. Finally, someone put her in her place. The businessman nodded, a smug smirk returning to his face. About time. These kids need to learn some respect. Their voices were drowned out by a tide of outrage. "Oh my God," a mother whispered, shielding her child's eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" a young man shouted, leaping to his feet. "She's a kid," Vanessa was screaming, her voice raw. "You just assaulted a child. You are going to jail. Do you understand me? You are going to jail." Carlos was already on his phone, his fingers flying. "I'm calling the police. This is federal assault. I have it on video, clear as day." James Chen, the other flight attendant, rushed forward, his face drained of all color. "Rebecca, what did you—" He couldn't finish, couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what she had done. Rebecca stood frozen, her hands still trembling in the air. Her eyes darted around the cabin, finally seeing the sea of recording phones. She was getting aggressive, she stammered, her voice desperate. "I felt threatened." But the videos would not lie. In the eye of the storm, Stella stood perfectly still. Her hand came up to touch the corner of her mouth, her fingertips coming away wet and red. She stared at her own blood for a long moment. Then, she looked up at Rebecca. Her gaze swept across the faces that had tormented her, the ones who had lied about her, the ones who had shown her nothing but contempt. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the chaos with devastating clarity. "My mother is Michelle Richardson. She owns this airline." The words hung in the air like a detonation cord, the silence before the explosion. Rebecca's face, already pale, went ashen. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, she managed a single, strangled word. "What?" Stella raised her phone. Her hands were steady now. She scrolled through her contacts and hit dial. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered, clear enough for those nearby to hear on the speaker. "Baby, are you okay? Did you land?" Stella's voice was unnervingly calm. "Mom, you need to get on this plane when we land. It's bad." "What do you mean it's bad? Stella, what happened?" "A flight attendant just hit me, Mom. Slapped me in front of everyone. My lip is bleeding." The cabin went utterly silent. You could hear the hum of the air circulation, the buzz of a distant phone. You could hear the businessman's sharp intake of breath. Michelle Richardson's voice came through the phone again, no longer warm, but cold and hard as forged steel. "She did what? Say that again." "Yes, ma'am." "Who else was involved? Are there witnesses?" Stella's eyes moved slowly from face to face. "About 100 witnesses, Mom, and at least 20 videos." There was a pause. When Michelle spoke again, her voice was a frozen fire. "Don't move. Don't say another word to anyone. I'm making calls right now. That flight attendant is done. Everyone involved is done. Do you understand me?" The businessman, who had been smirking minutes earlier, now looked ill. "Wait, Richardson? As in, the Richardson who owns Skybridge Airlines?" The elderly woman's expression collapsed from self-righteousness to abject terror. "Oh my God. Oh no." Rebecca stood like a statue, her mind finally grasping the career-ending, life-altering magnitude of her actions. I didn't know who she was," she whispered. Stella looked directly at her. Her words were delivered with a calm that was more chilling than any shout. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them like a human being." The truth of it struck the cabin with the force of a physical blow. Suddenly the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and urgent. "This is your captain speaking. All passengers remain seated. Do not move about the cabin. Flight attendants report to the cockpit. Now." Rebecca stumbled backward, making her way up the aisle like a condemned prisoner walking her last mile. The businessman sank into his seat, frantically scrolling through his phone. The elderly woman was openly weeping, her whimpers of, "I was just scared," lost in the tense silence. Vanessa crossed the aisle and sat in the now empty seat beside Stella. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, her own eyes filling with tears. "Let me see that." And that was when the adrenaline finally receded. Stella's hands began to shake again, her breath catching in her throat as the reality of it all crashed down. Her voice was small, a child's voice. "This was my first time flying alone." Vanessa wrapped her arms around the trembling girl. "I am so sorry this happened," she whispered, "but you were so brave, so incredibly brave." Carlos appeared with a first aid kit from his carry-on. "I'm a paramedic," he said gently. "Let me clean that up for you." One by one, other passengers began to approach, their faces etched with guilt. "I'm sorry," a middle-aged man said. "I saw what was happening. I should have said something." A young woman offered her phone. "I recorded everything. You can have my video as evidence." But the passengers who had lied, the ones who had instigated the hate, they remained frozen in their seats. The businessman, the woman who felt unsafe, the elderly lady who had applauded the violence. They sat clutching their phones, realizing with dawning horror that their faces, their words, their racism had been documented for the world to see. In the cockpit, Captain Dennis Walsh had already seen the passenger manifest. He had seen the name, Stella Richardson, and the emergency contact, Michelle Richardson, CEO. He had already received a flood of messages with video attachments. His face was grim as he spoke into the radio. "LAX ground control, this is flight 447. We have a priority situation. We are declaring an in-flight emergency and require law enforcement to meet the aircraft upon landing. We have a federal assault of a minor by a crew member." Rebecca's knees gave out. James lunged forward, catching Stella just before she hit the floor. A moment later, back in her seat, she felt the comforting weight of Vanessa's arm around her shoulders, while Carlos gently tended to her bleeding lip. All around her, the cabin was a sea of whispers and phone screens, passengers murmuring and recording, trying to make sense of the violence they had just witnessed. Stella's phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from her mother. "I've spoken to the captain. I've spoken to the FBI. I've spoken to our legal team. You're safe now, baby. Justice is coming." Stella stared at the message. She looked around the cabin, at Rebecca, stumbling back from the cockpit like a ghost, at the businessman frantically deleting apps from his phone, at the elderly woman sobbing into her hands. She looked at Vanessa and Carlos and the few others who had stood with her. Justice was coming, and it was going to change everything. Inside the cockpit, Captain Dennis Walsh stood with his arms crossed, listening to Rebecca Mitchell's explanation. Except it wasn't an explanation. It was a frantic, desperate cascade of contradictions tumbling from her mouth. She was aggressive, Captain. She wouldn't follow instructions. She was causing a disturbance. Passengers were complaining. I felt threatened. She wouldn't move. She raised her voice. I had to do something. She was... Captain Walsh held up a hand, silencing her. He'd heard enough. Turning to his tablet, he pulled up the passenger manifest and scrolled until he found seat 12A. Richardson, Stella. He tapped the name. Emergency contact information bloomed on the screen. Michelle Richardson, CEO, Skybridge Airlines. His jaw tightened, his expression hardening into a grim mask. He looked up at Rebecca, who was still rambling, oblivious that she had lost her audience entirely. "You struck the owner's daughter?" The words were flat, cold, and final. Rebecca stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. "What?" "The girl you just slapped," the captain clarified, his voice devoid of any warmth. "That's Stella Richardson. Her mother is Michelle Richardson, the CEO and owner of Skybridge Airlines, the woman who signs our paychecks, the woman who owns this plane." Rebecca's legs buckled. She staggered back, catching herself against the cockpit wall, her face draining from pale to a ghastly gray. "I didn't know," she rasped. "I didn't know who she was. How could I know?" "There are videos, Rebecca," Captain Walsh said, his voice hard as granite. I've already received a dozen from passengers. I've seen what happened. She wasn't being difficult. She was being black, and you couldn't handle it. The words struck Rebecca with the force of another slap. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The co-pilot, Maria Santos, who had been silent until now, turned in her seat, her gaze a mixture of disgust and pity. "Her mother is going to destroy you," she said quietly. "And honestly, you deserve it." That's when Rebecca began to cry. Not the calculated, performative tears she might have used to get her way in the past, but the raw, terrified sobs of someone who finally understood the magnitude of her actions. Captain Walsh felt no sympathy. He picked up the radio. "LAX ground, this is Flight 447. We have an incident requiring law enforcement upon landing. Assault of a minor by a crew member will need FBI and local police to meet the aircraft." The controller's voice came back, professional but laced with surprise. "Flight 447, copy. Confirming assault of a minor?" "Confirmed," Walsh replied. "We have multiple witnesses and video evidence. The crew member will be placed under arrest upon arrival." "Roger that, Flight 447. Emergency services will be standing by." Walsh set down the radio and picked up the intercom handset. He took a deep breath. In 30 years of flying, he had never made an announcement like this. He pressed the button. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I need to address the incident that just occurred in the cabin." The plane fell silent. Every conversation ceased. All eyes turned toward the overhead speakers. "A member of our flight crew physically assaulted a passenger," the captain stated, his voice ringing with authority. "This is unacceptable. It is illegal, and it in no way represents the values this airline should uphold." You could have heard a pin drop. "The crew member has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately, and will be arrested by federal authorities upon landing." From the cockpit, a sound like a wounded animal escaped Rebecca's lips. The captain continued. "I also need to acknowledge that the passenger who was assaulted is Stella Richardson, daughter of Michelle Richardson, the CEO and owner of Skybridge Airlines." A wave of gasps rippled through the cabin. The businessman in the expensive suit felt his stomach plummet. The elderly woman clutched her pearls, a sob catching in her throat. The teenager who'd made snide remarks now looked utterly terrified. "I have been flying for 30 years, the captain said, his voice now thick with a barely contained fury. "And I am disgusted by what I witnessed today, not just from my crew member but from passengers who participated in the harassment of a young woman who was doing nothing more than existing on this plane." The complicit passengers seemed to shrink in their seats. "When we land, the FBI will board this aircraft to take statements. Anyone who made false complaints against Ms. Richardson or participated in her harassment may face federal charges." The businessman's face was ashen. The elderly woman was now weeping openly, but the captain wasn't finished. "To those of you who stood up for Ms. Richardson, thank you. You showed courage and compassion. You showed what humanity is supposed to look like." In her seat, Vanessa squeezed Stella's hand. The captain's voice softened. "Ms. Richardson, on behalf of everyone who failed you today, I am deeply sorry. Your mother is being updated in real time, and I promise you, significant changes will be made." He paused. "We have about 40 minutes until landing. I ask that everyone remain calm and respectful." He hung up and turned to Rebecca. "Sit down. Don't move. Don't speak. You will be escorted off this aircraft in handcuffs." She collapsed into the jump seat, her life crumbling around her. Back in the cabin, Stella texted her mother with shaking fingers. "I'm okay now, Mom. Some passengers helped me." The reply was instantaneous. "I know, baby. I've seen the videos. We're meeting the plane. Nobody who hurt you is walking away from this. Nobody." Stella put her phone away, leaning into Vanessa's embrace. Just then, a woman from a few rows back approached, her face wet with tears. "I am so ashamed," she choked out. "I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong, and I said nothing. I sat there like a coward, and I am so sorry." She wiped her eyes. "I recorded everything. If you need it for court, for anything, it's yours, and I will testify." She was the first. A line began to form in the aisle, a procession of apologies and offers of evidence, a somber parade of guilt and regret. Then, a woman in a tailored business suit walked back from first class. She was black, in her 40s, radiating an air of authority. Stella Richardson? Stella looked up. Yes? My name is Sharon Mills. I'm a civil rights attorney. She handed Stella a business card. I recorded every moment. I would be honored to represent you pro bono. We need to make sure every single person who hurt you today faces consequences. Her expression softened. You were incredibly brave. Tears pricked Stella's eyes. I didn't feel brave. I felt scared. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Sharon said gently. It's doing the right thing even when you are scared. And that's exactly what you did. The plane touched down at LAX, taxiing to a remote stand surrounded by police cars and black SUVs. Rebecca was escorted off first, mascara streaking her face as she was led away in handcuffs. As she passed Stella's row, she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were." Stella looked at her, her voice quiet but firm. That's the problem. You should treat everyone with respect, not just the people who have power over you. Then Michelle Richardson boarded the plane. Elegant and powerful, she walked directly to row 12. The moment Stella saw her, she finally broke down. "Mom." Michelle wrapped her in a fierce embrace. "I've got you, baby." She saw Stella's split lip and her jaw clenched. Turning, she addressed the cabin, her voice a blade of ice. "My name is Michelle Richardson. What happened to my daughter today is a stain on this airline. Every person who harassed her will be permanently banned from all 43 airlines my company owns or partners with worldwide. The FBI has video evidence, and my legal team will be filing civil suits." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the silent passengers. "To those who helped her, your flights on this airline are free for life. Consider it a down payment on our gratitude for your decency." Stepping off the plane and into the California sun, Michelle was already on her phone, her voice precise and unwavering. "I want a full investigation, new policies, a complete audit of every dismissed complaint. I want it done by next month." She spotted Ms. Patricia, the chaperone, cowering by a security car. Michelle's voice dropped to a glacial whisper. "You abandoned my daughter. You're fired. If I ever hear you're working with children again, I will personally ensure every family in the country knows what you did." 6 months later, Stella stood before a room of flight attendants in training. 6 months ago, on my first solo flight, I was harassed and assaulted, she began, as the videos played on the screen behind her. This happened because people made assumptions based on the color of my skin. You shouldn't need to know someone's name to treat them with dignity. Afterward, as she boarded a flight, now as a consultant for the airline, a flight attendant greeted her. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Richardson." Stella smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "Treat me like anyone else," she said. "That's the point." She settled into her seat, opened her book, and for the first time in a long time, felt at peace in the sky. Rebecca Mitchell served 18 months in federal prison and was banned from the aviation industry for life. Several passengers were banned from Skybridge and its partners. 2 faced steep civil penalties. Ms. Patricia lost her child care license. And in the year following the incident, after sweeping reforms were implemented, discrimination complaints at the airline dropped by 73%. Stella Richardson, now 19, is studying aviation management and serves as a youth passenger advocate. Her story became a catalyst for change, a stark reminder that discrimination often targets those without power or a famous name. It became a testament to the fact that when faced with injustice, the worst thing you can do is remain silent. For justice to prevail, it needs witnesses, it needs a voice.